When it comes to shadow work, there's a lot to know. It's a pretty simple practice. However, once you get into the nitty-gritty of it, it can get complicated and there's some things to look out for. So I created a list of the 10 most important tips to give to beginners of shadow integration. What up, everybody? Welcome back to Operation Moksha. As always, I'm your host, Chris Roscoe. We're just gonna get right into it with the very first tip: craft a compelling vision for your life. You wanna have a context to your shadow integration practice. Shadow integration is different than most other practices in that you are looking really deep into yourself, looking for things to love, integrate, create better relationships with. And the thing about that is you will never run out of things to look at and look for. So a really key important factor is to make sure that you are doing this in service of something. To make sure that when you look inside yourself and when you address your shadow and all that deep shit in there, that it's for a reason, for a purpose, so that it can help you get closer to achieving that vision and become closer to the person who can actually achieve that vision with a sense of ease and grace. And so the whole point of this is to make sure that you're doing it in service of something. Not only do you want to have something that you're oriented towards so that you don't just spend your whole life navel gazing and not really getting anywhere, but you also want to make sure that when the shit gets really hard and scary, that you have a compelling reason to keep going. Because your mind is going to fight really hard to keep you where you're at, to make sure that all those ideas that don't serve you very well get to stay intact so you stay small and safe. They're going to get really convincing. And if you have a really compelling reason to keep going, and that can just make it a lot easier to put it all into context so that you know what you're doing, why you're doing it, why it's worth it, and rather than just kind of stir up all this shit and not really have anywhere to go with it. So the first thing you want to do is create a vision for your life that gives you somewhere to go and a reason to keep going when shit gets scary. So number 2, don't overthink it. Someone will DM me their whole experience and talk about this really deep thing that they're going through, and they'll be like, is this a shadow? Is this blah, 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 blah? And the answer is it doesn't matter. It's really easy to apply perfectionism to your shadow integration practice and want to do it right and get so obsessed with doing it right that you ignore the obvious steps in front of you. And the obvious steps in front of you are: be good to yourself. Find the parts of you that are suffering the most, give them love, give them space, take care of them, figure out what they need from you, meet those needs so that they can become healthy, and you can keep going on your journey towards achieving your vision. All you really need to know is, what part of me is creating this bad thing I don't want? Why is it doing that? How can I help it find a healthier perspective? And then how can I move on? That's really all you need to worry about. You don't need to worry about what a shadow is. You don't need to worry about all the different elements of the mind and what their purpose is. It's not important. You don't have to worry about the ages of these parts. You don't have to worry about their names. You don't have to worry about really any information other than what they actually need from you in order to become healthy. So if you start thinking in terms other than what is my next step directly in front of me, you're overthinking it. So keep this really simple. The whole point is to just be good to the parts of you that need it the most. That's all you have to do. As long as you're doing that, you're doing it right. So tip number 3 is there's a huge difference between shadow work and shadow integration. Shadow work is anything that allows you to become aware of the contents of your shadow or your unconscious, subconscious, any shit like that. Sitting meditation. If you're just sitting and breathing, your unconscious material will start to come to the surface. You'll become aware of it. You'll become a little bit more peaceful with it. Same with talk therapy, same with journaling, same with all these different practices that have you kind of talk about these things or become aware of these things. That's shadow work, in that you are becoming aware of them, you're becoming more comfortable with them, you're getting a little bit more freedom around them, and you're generally kind of feeling better. However, that doesn't lead to integration, because integration is a separate step that you have to take where you're not only observing your internal world, you're not only becoming aware of it and accepting it, you're also analyzing it. You have a specific set of questions that you're trying to get answers to. And those questions are: what is this part of me? Why is it acting the way that it is? What is it protecting me from? And ultimately, what does it need from me? Because integration is what happens when the part of you that's doing the bad thing, whatever it is, integration is what happens when it no longer has a reason to keep doing the bad thing. Here's an example from my own personal life. So when I started doing shadow integration, it was because I had a lot of repressed rage. I was getting way too angry all the time. And so I could have just become aware of and present with my anger and maybe become a little bit less reactive, become a little bit more free in my anger. However, that wouldn't be integration. So what I did in order to integrate the anger was to figure out what it was that was making me so angry in the first place and address that on an emotional and practical level. There's a part of me that keeps getting angry. Great, what's your deal? Let me take care of you. Let me let you know that you are loved, even if you do get angry, but then let me also understand the pain underneath of the anger. And then the practical element is, what in my actual world was making me angry? And the answer to that was, I was being emotionally abused all the time. I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I didn't know how to set boundaries. So people would just walk all over me and it was constantly pissing me off. Once I set the boundaries, and so the thing that was happening was no longer pissing me off, and then I dealt with the anger and dealt with the pain underneath of the anger, the pattern no longer had a reason to exist. That's when it became integrated. I wasn't just present with my anger, I wasn't just comfortable with it, I dealt with it in such a way that it stopped showing up altogether, and instead it just turned into a more positive pattern of me lovingly being able to hold my boundaries rather than just getting really fucking angry about shit all the time and exploding and setting my boundaries that way. So that's what integration looks like, and that's the difference between shadow work and shadow integration. So tip number 4, when you express an emotion and you get it out of your body, it creates a vacuum, and that vacuum will be filled by whatever is in your environment. Tip number 4, when you release an emotion, you have to replace it with something healthy. Let's say I have this whole portion of my body that is filled with shame, right? And if I express all of the shame that was filling up this portion of my body, and it's all gone, there is now a void, an empty space. And if you've ever heard the phrase, nature abhors a vacuum, what that means is if there's ever a space or a vacuum, it gets filled. And it will get filled by whatever is in your environment, unless you fill it with your own conscious beliefs, thoughts, visions, and imaginings, and whatever else you need. If I release a whole bunch of emotion and I don't fill it, it will get filled by whatever is in my environment. You know, if you're lucky, you have a good environment and that's not that big of a deal. However, most of us are doing this work because our environments could use a little bit of work. So if that's the case, you want to make sure that you are releasing things and immediately replacing them with something good. And I'll give you a practical tip for this. The mantra that I use, which I stole from EFT practitioners, goes like this. Even though X, I choose Y. Even though I feel shame, I choose to love and respect myself. Right? So what that does is you're saying, even though I feel the shame, which is acknowledging that you feel the shame and allowing it to move through you. And you're saying, even though that's there, I choose to love and respect myself. And so what you're doing is removing a little bit and immediately replacing it with something positive. So as all that stuff that starts to move from saying, even though I'm ashamed, that starts to move, that starts to leave your body, I choose to love and respect myself, that void and that space that I mentioned, immediately filled by something more positive. You have anchored yourself just a little bit more into the positive belief by releasing the negative and filling it with the positive. So if you do this enough, you will eventually drain the tank of negative shit and have it filled back up with positive stuff. So that's why you want to use the mantra, even though X, I choose Y. And I framed it that way because you can plug this in and play it on anything that you're dealing with. Even though I'm afraid, I choose to know that I'm courageous. Even though I fucking hate myself, I choose to know that I'm amazing. Like whatever it is you need to do, whatever it is you're dealing with, there's a way you can use this mantra to empty out and fill in with the positive. And if you don't know how to process emotion in the way that I'm talking about, I do actually have a full course on shadow integration that can teach you how to create the vision, how to process the emotions, how to replace them, and ultimately how to do shadow integration as well. I also have a free resource that can explain a lot of this shit. So whatever it is you need, I've got something for you. Tip number 5, it's gonna get weird. When you are about to fully release an emotion, it's going to be so convincing. When you're releasing the belief that I'm unlovable, the only reason you have to release that belief is because it's true to some part of you. Some part of you actually believes that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in your internal makeup. And so when you face the part of you that actually believes it, and when you validate it and you actually allow yourself to meld with it and see the world through its eyes, it's going to look and feel like that is the truest thing you've ever heard in your life. You are going to be deeply connected to the part of you that just knows that you suck, and that just knows that you're inherently unworthy of love. That is gonna feel like the realest shit in the world, and that's a good sign. When you've gotten to that point, you know you're right about to break through it. So when it gets the realest, it's scary and it's painful, but hopefully some part of you can smile because you know you've done a good job. You know you've unearthed it. You know you validated it. You know you've allowed it to feel safe enough to come to the surface to the point where you can finally see through its own eyes and break the spell once and for all. So know that this is going to happen. And as it rises from your unconscious mind to your conscious mind, it's going to feel like you're going backwards. It's going to feel like things are getting worse, but that's not the case. What's actually happening is a belief that you've had the entire time you were just ignoring. You pushed it into the shadow, you pushed it into the unconscious. You weren't really aware of how intense it actually was because you just didn't want to. But as it starts to come from your unconscious mind to your conscious mind, you're going to be able to see it much more clearly, and it's going to be much more present, and it's going to start taking up more of your awareness. So it's going to feel like things are getting worse. It's going to feel like you're going backwards. But what's actually happening is you're getting a better view of what was already there the whole time. And if you can love yourself through it, if you can nurture yourself through it, if you can take care of yourself through it, eventually the spell breaks, you realize how ridiculous the whole thing was, and you can just move on with your life. However, right before that happens, it's gonna get really fucking real. So look forward to that, know that's gonna happen, know it's a good thing, and know that that means that you're almost about to get to the other side of it. So tip number 6, go at your own pace. This is something that you just can't choose. You will grow and develop at the rate that you grow and develop, and you don't get a say in that. All you can really do is create the optimal environment to allow that growth to happen. And it'll just happen at the pace that it happens. Because what you're doing is you're building trust, you're building relationships, and relationships just grow with the degree that they do. Like if you're dating someone and you really want them to trust you and you really want them to like you and want them to, you can't make them want to do that faster than they want to. They just either want to or they don't. And you can do certain things to make that happen, but it's just dependent on how safe the person feels, how much time they need to let go, whatever they've gone through, blah, 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 blah. So as you're dealing with deeper and deeper parts of yourself, they're gonna let go at the pace that they let go. They're gonna trust you with the pace that they trust you. And you have to respect that pace. If you try and push them, what's gonna end up happening is they're gonna dig their heels in because they don't feel safe. They believe things that you told them to believe. All these different parts of you are only doing what you told them to do. And if they're digging their heels in, it's because you told them to. So if they believe something like, I suck, or I can't do it, or the world is hard, they believe that because you told them that that's what they needed to believe in order to feel safe. So when you start pushing, they're gonna be like, no, I have to hold on to this belief because this is where the safety is. You're trying to push me out of safety into something bad. And so they're gonna trust you less, they're gonna like you less, they're gonna dig their heels in and really commit to the belief that you're trying to get them out of. So you don't wanna push past your own capacity, you don't wanna do anything like that. You wanna pay attention to what ways do I relate to myself that make me feel good? What ways do I relate to myself to create this kind of experience of softening and expanding and letting go of my pain? What are the ways of relating to myself make me tighten and hold on to my pain tighter and get me even less trustworthy and all kinds of shit? So you want to use your body for this because your body is going to tell you, when I relate to myself this way, am I softening and feeling safer, or am I tightening and getting more freaked out? And that's the kind of pace you want to work at. I can hold this much awareness and then I soften, but if I push too far, I get tightened. So you just need to kind of play with that capacity to be able to just expand without pushing too hard. And it's an intuitive process, it's a give and take. It's not something I can really teach you, it's something you can only develop yourself, but I can give you the guidelines for it. Again, what you're doing is building trust. And if somebody has been wounded and traumatized and you push them to trust you, they're not going to. But if you just allow it to be okay that they don't, allow it to be okay that they're in pain, and just let them be what they are and give them love, whatever they are, however they are, eventually they will relax over time, they'll feel better over time, and that's just a pace that you have to respect. So if any part of you is impatient, that is another part of you that needs to be looked at and integrated, because that impatience is just gonna make things go on a lot longer, and potentially make it that you never get to any meaningful sense of integration. So if you do have an impatient part of you, you may need to look at that first. Number 7, if it gets scary or overwhelming or too dysregulating, just stop. Just stop. Because this is a practice, it's fairly easy to overdo it, right? You can overwhelm yourself, you can push yourself harder than you need to. And so there are some foundational things that you need to be able to do. If you don't know how to do those foundational things, you can freak yourself out more. If in your attempts to do shadow integration, you start to get more anxious, you start to get more depressed, you start to get overwhelmed, or you start to get dysregulated in ways that you don't exactly know how to handle or deal with, just back off for a little bit. maybe relearn the fundamentals, maybe take a look at my freebie that I created. There should be a link to it in the description. Maybe take some of my courses. You can send me DMs and I can make you more content on whatever it is you need. But there are some foundational elements to the shadow integration practice that you need to be able to learn in order to do this practice in a way that doesn't make things worse. And those foundational elements, they're in the way that you approach yourself. They're in the context and the way that you look at yourself. They're in whether or not you are trying to integrate something that you still hate, or whether or not you've forgiven it first. There's just a few important foundational elements that if they're not there, they can actually make this practice work against you. And so you want to really pay attention to whether or not what you're doing is making you feel better and is improving the quality of your life, or if it's just freaking you out and making you even more panicked. If it is, back off, take a look at whether or not you actually know what you're doing, take a look at whether or not you're doing this from an actually compassionate and apologetic frame of mind. Because one of the key things you do need to know is that all these different parts of your personality are only acting this way because you were shitty to them. If you were nice to them and were kind to them and loving and nurturing, they would be acting different. The reason they're acting the way they are is because you locked them into a room for God knows how long, and every time they tried to get out, you just beat them and put them back in that room. So why would they act well? That doesn't make any sense. So you have to go in with an apologetic heart, which can be hard to do with something that has caused you pain for your entire life. So if you don't know how to do that, it's not your fault. It's not like it's an intuitive, easy thing to do. Those things can make it worse. So if you are experiencing your symptoms getting more intense, stop, back off, revisit the fundamentals, and make sure you know what you're actually doing. Tip number 8, the identity is one of the most important tools that you have in your psychological toolbox. And so shifting your identity is a great way to shift your entire worldview, as well as shifting the trajectory that your worldview was basically putting you on. However, there's something interesting that happens is because when you have a negative identity, like I don't deserve love, or I'm a terrible person, or whatever it might be, you want to dismantle that identity because it's feeding you shitty ideas and it's steering your perspectives and your behaviors and your patterns in really negative ways. Dismantling an identity is not something to be done lightly. You are still dismantling the focal point of your entire reality. Even though you won't be walking around thinking like, oh, I suck and don't deserve love, instead you'll be walking around thinking, what am I? Like, what do I do with my time? I don't know how to orient myself towards my day or towards my relationships, because your identity is the focal point that shows you who you are in any given situation. If you think that you're a loser and you walk into a room, you're like, okay, I know how to behave because I'm a loser. I behave like a loser would in this situation. And then when you dismantle the identity of being a loser, you walk into the same room, but you don't have a context. You don't have a focal point. And so this is what people call an identity crisis, and it is inherently unnerving and is unpleasant, which is why your mind fights so hard to make sure that you have a focal point so that you don't have to exist in that existential no man's land for too long. Which is another reason why having a vision and an identity crafted for yourself is so important. So that when you dislodge the old identity and create the vacuum that we were talking about, you get to fill it with your vision, with your identity, with who you're choosing to become. And that gives you at least kind of like a rope to pull in the dark, because you at least know what direction you're walking, even if you don't have a solid context for your reality. So just know that the space in between identities is gonna get really fucking weird, and it's gonna be disorienting, but it's all part of the process. Just remember where you're going and why you did this in the first place, and you will get to the other side. So tip number 9, you don't actually have to earn love from yourself. I had to learn this because I had so much repressed rage that it was basically turning me into a monster. Scared the shit out of me. I had to love this thing in order for it to get healthy, and yet I hated it and feared it. So it was this weird, how do I love this thing that has hurt me so much and caused me so much pain and is threatening to hurt the people in my life? How can I love this thing? And the only reason that was hard is because up until that point, I had looked at love as something that is earned, something that is given because it means approval. It means I like what you're doing, keep doing more of it. You're a super good person, keep going. And that's not actually what love is, at least in this context. Love is like a practical tool. When you deprive any given part of yourself from love, it deteriorates and becomes toxic and less healthy. That's just how it works. Whereas if you give it love, it becomes healthy, sheds all of its toxicity, and becomes a good thing. Just like if you've ever seen a video of like a rabid dog that is just like all aggressive and shit, and then somebody takes a little bit of time, loves it, gives them some space, takes care of it, suddenly it becomes completely unrecognizable, personable, and wonderful. Same thing with you. You have to get past the idea that love means approval. You have to get past the idea that any given part of you like deserves love or is worthy of it. It's simply a practical tool in order to make things become healthy. So it's not something that you earn or deserve, it's something that you simply need, like oxygen and food and water. If you don't have those things, you die. It's not a matter of like, ooh, I'm worthy of food today. That's not a thing. You need to eat in order to continue going. You don't need to be worthy of love. You need to give it to yourself so that you can become healthy. Now, that may take a little bit of time to wrestle with. You're gonna have to find ways to do it on your own. You may need to first face the parts of you that really hate yourself or do whatever else that you need to do in order to clear some shit out. However, just know that love is the transformational mechanism that will turn you into who you wanna be. It is not something that you need to earn, but that's only for you. You still need to earn love from the people around you. No one around you is just gonna give you love no matter how shitty you act, and they shouldn't, because that is codependency and that's bad behavior and no one should be expected to do that. You shouldn't do it for other people. Let other people earn your love and respect, but give it to yourself unconditionally and without reason so that you can become the version of yourself that you want to become. I'll also give you a little bit of a practical tip on how to start developing love for yourself, because again, this is weird for me. I didn't know how to do this. I just knew that I had to. The concept of loving myself was strange and foreign to me and didn't make any sense. So it was kind of funny how I got my entry point into it, is I had to imagine something that I knew I loved unconditionally, and so I thought of puppies. I thought of puppies and kittens. And I imagined the way that I felt about puppies and kittens, and then I tried to transfer that to me. And all I had to do was hold the memory of what it's like to see a puppy. You see a puppy and you're just like, I don't know what you do, you can shit in my shoes and I will love you no matter what, I don't care. And that kind of energy can be transferred to yourself, and it's the memory of remembering what it's like to love something, and then eventually you can transfer that over to yourself. That's about as practical as I can give you, because this is a very abstract, nuanced thing that you're just gonna have to figure out for yourself. However, that's one of the things I did to develop for myself, so if you play with that, you should be able to figure it out. So tip number 10, as you begin to integrate your shadow, the people around you may relate to you differently. Now this is really, really important, all right, especially if you're a people pleaser, because what ends up happening is with people pleasing and a lot of certain behaviors, other people can become unconsciously dependent on the version of you that you used to be, right? Because if you develop your friendships bonding over how much life sucks, if you developed your friendships bonding over how much you suck, which is something that I've done before. Me and my friends in high school were all self-destructive punks, and we all bonded over self-destruction. Like, you can bond over anything. So if you bonded over shitty things and unhealthy things with your group of friends, and all of a sudden you become healthy, you threaten their existential foundation, right? Because it's like they're hanging out with you because you all bond about feeling shitty. It's this safe little cesspool where you can all feel terrible and nobody judges because you're all equally terrible. But then one of you starts changing the script. One of you starts being like, actually, you know what, maybe I don't suck. Actually, maybe life isn't so bad. Maybe things are great. And then everybody else who was like, wait a minute, f you, bro. Like, we all bonded over how terrible everything is. And now you're making me feel bad because you're getting better. And so things like that might actually happen. It may suck. It's probably gonna suck. I've lost multiple groups of friends doing this. However, I never lost anything that I wasn't better off without. If you keep your mind on where you're going and who you want to become, yes, sometimes the people in your life will have adverse reactions to it, but what they're really having adverse reactions to is you embodying something that they refuse to embody themselves. And so you want to forgive them, you want to be loving, you want to be okay. However, it's important to know that not everybody is going to go on this journey with you. Not everybody's prepared to, not everybody is able to. So if you go on this journey, you may have to walk alone for a prolonged period of time, but I can tell you from personal experience that if you just keep going, you will get somewhere that is absolutely worth it. So you may lose some friends, you may lose, I had a girlfriend of 4 years look me dead in my eye and tell me that my worldview was useless just because I thought hating people for their political opinions was kind of a dumb idea. So as you start integrating things, you will become something that other people don't understand. Maybe you become something that people are afraid of. That's fine, forgive them. The whole like, they know not what they do thing is very real here because they literally don't. You are embodying something in them that they don't know how to deal with. It is pure ignorance. You are embodying something that reminds them of a part of themselves that they do not know how to deal with. And so the only thing they know how to deal with this part of themselves is to push it away. Therefore, the only way they know how to deal with you is to push you away. So it's not your fault. Don't take it personally. All they're doing is treating you the way they treat themselves. Forgive them, love them, move on, remember where you're going, and just keep walking. So those are my 10 tips for beginning your shadow integration process. There are a million other tips that I can give, so maybe we'll have to do another video like this. However, these were the first immediate, most important 10 tips for beginners. These are the things that I learned very early on that had a huge impact on me. So I'm hoping this is helpful. Let me know if you have any comments or anything like that. As always, I can always make more videos or write more content or whatever you need in order to help all of this make more sense. So let me know what you need. But I'm Chris Roscoe. I love you. I'll see you next time.